Given how bad things already are, I can already tell that most people working today are never going to retire in any meaningful way. If you're a baby boomer, you're probably already retired and there's still a few in the workplace, but most of them got their retirement. If you are Gen X, then there's a good chance you're going to retire, but you're not necessarily going to be comfortable. If you're a millennial, there is a chance you might retire someday, but it is probably going to be partial retirement at best. And many millennials, and I would include myself in this, are probably just not ever going to retire. Most of them are probably going to be working until they croak. And then if you're Gen Z or younger, retirement, the baby boomer concept of retirement just will not be a thing by the time you reach retirement age in about 35, 40 years. Now, one thing that a lot of people don't think about is that the modern concept of retirement is a new thing. And it really only hit its stride with the baby boomers after World War II. And by that, I mean they were set up to have that kind of retirement where you have a pension from a company and you put in your 40 years and you don't have to be scrambling and struggling to eke out an existence by the time you hit 65. And then that was also the case for the GI generation or the greatest generation, whichever one you want to call them, the ones who fought in World War II. And then before that, it was still a very young system. Social Security has existed. It's been before World War II. I forgot the exact year. I want to say late 20s or early 30s when it first came online. But anyway, the modern concept of retirement is only about a century old. And the reason it's breaking down now is because what it was set up, or I should say, how it was set up to function, was dependent on two things that tie into each other. And the first one was population growth, which of course is declining horribly. And it's doing this in most of the world too. And I've made other videos talking about this, but the developed world, of course, has some of the lowest birth rates, but even developing countries are starting to have lower birth rates since about, I think it was about 2023. So fairly recently, that many countries, even developing ones, have dropped under 2.1 total fertility rate. So anyway, the idea for this was that you would have more young people paying for the older people who had retired. And if the population keeps growing, this could work. In theory, it could work indefinitely. But with a declining population, it becomes more and more dysfunctional until it goes insolvent, which is exactly what is happening with Social Security in the US, and I'm sure many other countries as well. Now, the second thing, which is tied into the population growth, is economic growth, and that's really a function of population growth in so many ways. So the economy needed to keep growing to provide opportunities for the younger workers who would pay into the system. So when you have a declining system like we have in the US and many other countries, where not only is the population declining, but the young people who do exist are struggling heavily with the job market and really all facets of what we used to think of as normal life, this is really a recipe for dysfunction, and eventually that whole system will implode over some years and decades from now. Okay, so you might think, well, since this current system is only about 100 years old or so, why couldn't we just go back to the way things used to be? And the way things used to be was you had the multi-generational household where you would have, the children, their parents, grandparents, and sometimes other relatives living under one household. If you look at old movies, especially from before World War II, you can see evidence that things used to be this way, even represented that way, of course, in media. So why couldn't we just go back to that? Well, it ties into the problem of population growth, or population decline, I should say. With the population declining as it is, a multi-generational household just would not have nearly as many people in it, and therefore the support structure that it would provide anyway would be weaker than it used to be. Now, could that problem maybe be fixed on a long enough timeline? I think it probably could. But the problem, or the real pain from that, comes from transitioning back to that. And that is simply not something that could be done overnight. You're probably looking at I would say about 2 generations for any major societal change like that to really take root and become the new way of life. Okay, so to go back to sort of the modern idea of retirement, well, you can see a deterioration with that really from the get go. Now, of course, the baby boomers had the best overall system where, and some of the greatest generation too. So, back during those times, you could work at a company, you'd put in your 40 years, you'd retire, you'd get a gold watch, and you get a pension from the company, a private pension. And so your retirement was basically guaranteed because of company loyalty. People used to talk about company loyalty, and, that sounds like a fairy tale nowadays. It pretty much is. But once upon a time, that was the idea, is that you traded the 40 best years of your adult life in exchange for a retirement. And more than that, along the way, your job was specifically there because it was understood jobs were to support family formation, which of course would support more people being born and more people eventually becoming workers who would also work inside the system. Now, don't get me wrong, there's been a lot of criticism about that way of life, and there have been a lot of movies and books and songs and all kinds of other media talking about how empty that kind of life could be, which of course most of that was produced by people who were living during those times. Whereas now you have millennials and Gen Z who think things like, oh, I could get a cubicle and 65 grand a year, and I could have a wife and 2 kids, and like, wow, that sounds like a dream. Sign me up. But that stuff isn't there anymore. So just as an aside, it's interesting how perspectives change as the world and society and the economy change. But anyway, that was the first segment, I guess, of the modern retirement system. Was if you were loyal to the company, you gave them your 40 best years, you would get a pension from them. So your retirement was taken care of. And then you go to Gen X. So I said I would talk about them a little bit later. And I think this gets overlooked a lot, talking about retirement. But Gen X really didn't have they didn't have it as good as the baby boomers and the GI generation, at least when it came to retirement and some other things. So for retirement, the Gen X was the first generation to have to deal with 401ks. Now you think, okay, what's the big deal? And there are a lot of young people today who don't have jobs that have 401ks. So even that has become a luxury, and I'll talk about that too. But Gen X had to do that. They didn't have the company pension anymore. So with Gen X, the retirement planning aspect of life came down a lot more to personal decisions that you would have to figure out yourself in a lot of cases. And of course, if you didn't know what you were doing or didn't take the time to learn it, it was probably harder to do that. Now you could just do the 401k contribution and say, okay, that's good enough, I'm done. And then you're paying into Social Security. But I mean, when's the last time you ever heard of a retiree saying, oh yeah, my Social Security is plenty, or oh yeah, I'm doing just fine withdrawing 4% a year from my 401k? I don't know that I've ever heard any retiree saying that, or anyone close to retirement saying that, oh yeah, that's going to work out fine. Okay, so then you get to millennials, and that's my generation, and we're around middle age now. A lot of millennials are in their 40s now, and we're still doing the 401k thing. But of course, the pension is a dream unless you happen to work for the government. And that's usually how you get a pension anymore, is you have a government job. So teacher, policeman, it could just be a government janitor in a building or whatever. But that's about the only way to get a pension anymore. But then you have the 401k if you work in the private sector. And then it just comes down to Social Security, which is already insolvent. There have been some headlines recently about this, that I think it's by 2032, there's going to be a Social Security crisis if nothing has changed. Someone correct me if I'm wrong, but I didn't really look into it deeply, but I just remember those headlines maybe in the past week or two. So yeah, with Gen X, you had that whole thing where it sort of shifts over to your personal decisions determine your retirement. And millennials are still largely under that same system. Of course, things have deteriorated enough where, like I said, a lot of millennials are probably not ever going to retire in any meaningful sense. I think some of them, a few of them will retire at 65. Very, very few will do like, a fire type of retirement, like financial independence, retire early type of thing, or fat fire, any of those other variations. Like I was saying, Social Security is not really going to be a thing for millennials. Here's the thing, I'm assuming that Social Security in some form will be preserved for millennials to still have access to when they retire. However, it's not the money you're going to get is going to be a nominal amount, and it's not going to be worth the paper it's printed on. I mean, it barely is now. Like I was saying, when's the last time you heard a retiree saying, "Oh yeah, my Social Security's enough for my needs"? I don't think I've ever heard that, and I don't think I've heard that during the past 20 years from anybody. So I think what's more likely to happen is Social Security will be preserved in some form for millennials to retire, but the retirement age is going to be pushed back. And this is awful, and it's unjust, but this is almost certainly going to happen. Again, I'm not saying it's good. It's not. But a 65 retirement age is going to seem like a dream, probably 10 to 20 years from now. And part of this, look, I'm trying to be objective about this, but when the original retirement age of 65 was established, people did not live a whole lot past 65 on average. The average lifespan back then was, and we're talking about 80 to 100 years ago. The average lifespan was, I think it was like maybe about a decade less than it is now on average. So people would die oftentimes late 60s, early 70s, and so Social Security also was not meant to pay out for 10, 15, 20 plus years. And now it's not that uncommon for people to live well past 80, past 90 in a lot of cases. And there are more people now probably than ever that even make it, into their mid and late 90s into 100. So that's just a bitter reality. It's a double-edged sword, is that, yeah, people are living longer. Although I think that's starting to reverse a little bit with millennials too. It's the average is starting to slip again. So yeah, really bleak and dystopian times we're heading towards. But anyway, I would not be surprised if within the next 20 years the retirement age is pushed as far up as 75. And so that might be how a lot of millennials retire, is that they may technically get there, but they're going to retire much later, and they're going to have much less, and it's going to be a lot more miserable, and the quality of life is going to be a lot worse. And I do have some ideas for a more in-depth video about that later on. Okay, and then Gen Z, well, they're going to get the really, really short end of the stick. And here's the thing. I mean, millennials got a very short stick when they had to draw. But Gen Z I should maybe, just to extend the metaphor, I should just say Gen Z doesn't even get a stick. So Gen Z is a really small population, and then the Gen Alpha that's following them is even smaller, I believe. And so, look, if you're Gen Z, then I would say do anything you can to find an alternative to what the mainstream is telling you. I'm not saying do anything stupid. I'm just saying that if you're banking on just go to college and then come out and get a 9 to 5 and, then you'll retire at 65, it's just almost certainly not going to happen. Even if you're a millennial, this is unlikely to happen. And really a lot of that, stuff that's part of the life script has already not happened, or for millennials, a lot of it has happened, but it's happened very late. But if you're Gen Z, just try to find a way, like just put all of your creative energy into trying to find an alternative. It's not right. It's not fair. It's not just. But this is just the bad spot that, multiple generations are finding themselves in now. Okay, a few more things about retirement, and then I don't want this to drag on too long. Personal retirement planning. And I'm not I'm not trying to shill a book or a course or anything. I'm just bringing it up. But something like a Roth IRA or a traditional IRA, these do work. They're pretty effective because you use post-tax income to pay into them and fund them. And then if you pick like growth vehicles like an S&P 500 mutual fund or something like that, by the time you retire, again, you have to wait till the right time to take it out tax free. But if you did wait till, I think the minimum age is 59 and a half for those. But if you did wait the full time, your money, you would basically withdraw your money from it tax free because you already paid taxes in before you put the money in the fund. Now, I know Congress has suggested putting taxable amounts on those, like accounts of 1 million plus would be taxed, and I'm guessing that's almost certainly going to happen in our lifetime. So I'm not saying don't do it. I think those things are good nowadays, especially because the traditional, quote unquote, traditional, retirement vehicles are largely gone. But I would say don't expect that you can just that's going to be safe forever, because I doubt it's going to be. Just like the retirement age is not going to stay at 65. Beyond that, yeah, I don't know. I really realistically don't know, without people being able to get married and have children and start families, and for the population to grow, and for society to be more coherent, and for things to just start being more sane again, or more stable. I really don't think there's any solution to any of these. So I think for the foreseeable future, we're realistically looking at trying to make the best of a society that is in deep decline. So anyway, that's all I've got for this topic for now. Please let us know in the comments what your opinion is about this. Are you planning to retire someday? Are you planning to work past 65? Are you about to retire and you're worried about all this? Are you Gen Z and you're just starting out, or you're a millennial and you're almost halfway through it and you don't know how you're going to retire? Let us know your story in the comments, because this is a discussion that really needs to be had more. So please like, share, and subscribe if this topic is important to you. And thank you for listening, and we will see you in the next one.